What if Anakin joined Ahsoka on Mandalore? Initially, Obi-Wan was against Anakin joining Ahsoka on her mission, but Anakin refused to take no for an answer. As Anakin and Obi-Wan knew how powerful Maul was, sending Ahsoka alone to confront him could end devastating for Anakin's former student. Obi-Wan would reluctantly give in to Anakin, leaving his Padawan with a piece of advice. Be sure to capture Maul. He doesn't seem to stay dead. Anakin would respond, with pleasure, Master. Alarms would be ringing as the news of Coruscant was sent out. The Venator-class Star Destroyer was a hive of activity as the clone soldiers rushed around, preparing for defense of Coruscant. The Separatist army was closing in, and every moment counted. The clones worked quickly and efficiently, checking their weapons and gear as they rushed to their stations. The sound of their boots echoed through the corridors as they moved with a sense of purpose. As they reached the hangar, the clones could see the sleek shapes of their starfighters being loaded onto the launch racks. The engines hummed to life as they powered up, ready for battle ahead. As the Venator prepared to launch into hyperspace, the clones knew that they were facing a tough battle, but they were ready. They were trained for this moment, and they were determined to defend Coruscant and the Republic at all costs. Anakin was torn. On one hand, he wanted to aid Obi-Wan in this mission. The Separatist army was closing in, and the fate of the Republic hung in balance. Losing Coruscant could be devastating, and Anakin knew that he had to do everything in his power to protect it. On the other hand, Ahsoka had approached him with a mission of her own. She had received intelligence that Maul, the former Sith Lord, was hiding out on the planet of Mandalore, and Anakin knew he might have insight into the identity of Darth Sidious, the mastermind behind the Separatist movement. Capturing Maul could be a major blow to the Separatists and could bring them one step closer to ending the war. Anakin was caught in a difficult position. He knew that both missions were important and that he had to make a choice. If he stayed on Coruscant, he could help turn the tide of the battle and protect the Republic. But if he went with Ahsoka to Mandalore, he could potentially gather valuable intelligence and strike a major blow against the Separatists. In the end, Anakin made the decision to split his forces after consulting quickly with Obi-Wan. Anakin's master had informed him that Master Windu and Master Fisto would be aiding him in their efforts. Anakin assigned a portion of his troops to aid him and Ahsoka in their efforts to capture Maul. It was a risky move, but Anakin was determined to do everything in his power to bring an end to the war and bring peace to the galaxy. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mace Windu, and Kit Fisto flew their own Jedi starships as they entered the space battle above Coruscant. The Separatist droid ships were everywhere, and the air was filled with the sound of blaster fire and the roar of engines. Obi-Wan expertly maneuvered his ship through the chaos, darting in and out between incoming droid ships. He used the Force to guide his shots, destroying one droid ship after another. Mace Windu flew with grace and precision, his ship weaving through the enemy's fleet as he took out the droid ships with precise shots from his laser cannons. He was a formidable opponent and the droids knew to stay out of his way. Kit Fisto was a blur of motion, his ship zigzagging through the battle, dodging wave after wave of proton torpedoes being launched at him. His quick reflexes and proficiency with the Force made him hard to touch, and the droid struggled to keep up with him. Together, the three Jedi made their way through the battle, effortlessly flying in between incoming droid ships as they made their way towards the Invisible Hand, the ship that held the Chancellor and his captors, Count Dooku and General Grievous. They knew that time was of the essence, and they were determined to rescue the Chancellor and bring an end to the war. Meanwhile, Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano led an attack on Mandalore, with a fleet of clone gunships at their back. As they descend towards the planet's surface, the clones readied themselves for battle ahead. As the gunships got closer to the ground, the clones launched themselves from the ships using jetpacks to make their way towards the surface. Anakin and Ahsoka, however, elected to free fall towards the ground, using the Force to guide their descent. The air rushed past them as they fell, their lightsabers at ready as they deflected shots from the Mandalorian defenders. The ground was getting closer and closer, and Anakin and Ahsoka prepared themselves for the impact. At the last moment, they landed on top of a gunship, using the Force to cushion their fall and break their descent. The clones rushed to their side, and together they charged into battle, determined to capture Maul and bring an end to the war. Battle would ensue with the Republic forces attacking topside, but Anakin and Ahsoka would descend below the city as they heard about their men going missing down there. Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano were deep beneath the city of Mandalore, searching for the source of the strange disappearance that had been plaguing their troops. They were accompanied by a squad of clone troopers, their weapons at ready as they moved through the dark, narrow tunnels. The air was thick, with the smell of damp soil and the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. It was eerily quiet, and Anakin couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, the path ahead split off into two directions. Anakin and Ahsoka looked at each other, unsure of what path to take. That's when they heard it, the faint sound of screams echoing through the tunnels. Anakin and Ahsoka knew they had to act fast. They decided to split up, each taking different paths and searching for the missing soldiers. As Anakin moved through the tunnels, the screams grew louder and more urgent. He could feel the fear and desperation of his men. He knew he had to find them before it was too late. The tunnel twisted and turned, and Anakin struggled to keep his bearings, but he didn't let that slow him down. He pushed on, his lightsaber at ready, determined to rescue his men and get to the bottom of these disappearances. As he turned the corner, he saw a faint light up ahead. He quickened his pace, his heart racing as he prepared for whatever laid ahead, and when he finally burst into the chamber where his men were being held, he knew that he found the source of their mysterious disappearance. And there, standing in front of him, was none other than Darth Maul, the former Sith Lord. Anakin was taken aback by the sight of his old enemy, and he could feel the hatred and anger building inside him. Maul stood there with an evil smirk on his face, seeming to relish in the pain and anger he caused Skywalker. Anakin's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. He knew he couldn't let Maul get away. He needed to end this once and for all. Ahsoka would appear across from him as both their paths had taken them to this point. But instead of attacking, Maul simply let out a sinister laugh as he turned and bolted down another tunnel. Anakin hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. He knew he couldn't let Maul get away. "Come on," he shouted to his troops. "We can't let him escape." With a fierce determination, Anakin led the charge down the tunnel, his lightsaber at the ready. "Anakin, wait," Ahsoka called out. "We can't just charge after him blindly." But Anakin was blinded by his desire to capture Maul. He ignored Ahsoka's warning and charged after the Sith Lord. Ahsoka hesitated for a moment before following him, her own lightsaber drawn. But Maul's men would emerge from the shadows, blocking their path. Ahsoka and her clone squad were left alone to face off against them, her lightsabers flashing as they fought to keep them at bay. Anakin and his men followed the sound of Maul's footsteps, turning corners and darting down side passages as he gave chase. Maul was fast, but Anakin was determined. He was not going to let the Sith Lord slip away again. He pushed on, his breathing ragged as he tried to close the gap between them. Finally, they caught up to Maul up ahead. Anakin let out a battle cry as he charged towards him, his lightsaber flashing as he prepared to strike, but Maul was ready for him. With the flick of a wrist, he sent a blast of dark energy towards Anakin, forcing him back. Anakin stumbled, his grip on his lightsaber faltering as he fought to regain his footing. Maul took advantage of this momentary distraction to make his escape, disappearing down another tunnel as Anakin and his troops looked on in frustration. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mace Windu, and Kit Fisto fought their way through the Separatist droids as they made their way towards the room where the Chancellor was being held captive. The battle was fierce and the three Jedi were pushed to their limits as they fought to reach their goal. Obi-Wan's lightsaber flashed through the air as he cut down droid after droid, his movements precise and calculated. Mace Windu was a blur of motion, his lightsaber spinning as he took out the enemies with ease, and Kit Fisto was the master of the underwater style of fighting, his lightsaber moving through the air like a serpent as he took down his foes. Together, the three Jedi pushed through the droids, determined to rescue the Chancellor. They could feel the urgency of the situation, and they knew they had to act fast. Finally, they reached the room where the Chancellor was being held. They burst through the door, ready to take on any resistance that might come their way. But to their surprise, the room was empty save for the Chancellor, who was locked in a chair and overlooking the space battle above Coruscant. The Chancellor looked up as the Jedi entered, relief etched on his face. "Thank the stars you've come," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "We have to get out of here before it's too late." The Jedi nodded, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger, but it seemed that they had arrived just in time. As the Jedi began to release the restraints on the Chancellor, the door to the room suddenly burst open. Dooku and General Grievous stood there, their weapons at ready. Mace Windu stared at Dooku, his former friend and fellow Jedi. He could feel the darkness emanating from the Sith Lord. He knew that he had to end this once and for all. "Dooku," he said, cold and hard. "It ends now." Dooku sneered at him, his lightsaber igniting. "I'm afraid it's you. who will meet your end, old friend," he said as he charged towards the Jedi. At the same time, Obi-Wan and Kit Fisto faced off against General Grievous and his Magna Guards. The battle was fierce, and the room shook with the force of blows being exchanged. Mace Windu fought with all his might, his lightsaber flashing through the air as he battled against Dooku. Obi-Wan and Kit Fisto meanwhile fought with all their skill and strength against Grievous and his Magna Guards as they battled for supremacy. The room was filled with the sound of clashing lightsabers and the smell of ozone as the 5 combatants fought for control. The Chancellor watched from his chair, his heart racing as he waited for the outcome. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the fighting slowed. Dooku and Grievous were on the defensive, the movements growing slower and more desperate as the Jedi pressed their advantage. And then, with the final flourish, Mace Windu disarmed Dooku with his lightsaber slicing through the Sith Lord's weapon. Dooku looked at him, his eyes filled with hatred and defeat. "It's over," Mace said. "You have lost." Dooku glared at him for a moment before turning and fleeing the room, his escape route blocked by Obi-Wan and Kit Fisto, who defeated Grievous. Back on Coruscant, Count Dooku stood in front of the Jedi High Council, his wrist and ankle shackled to prevent any chance of escape. He knew that he had been defeated, and there was no way out of this. The council members looked at him with a mixture of anger and sadness. They had known Dooku for many years, and they had once considered him a friend, but now, they saw him as nothing more than a traitor and a Sith Lord. "Why, Dooku?" Mace Windu asked, his voice filled with disappointment. Dooku looked at him, a mix of defiance and regret in his eyes. "I had no choice," he said. "The Jedi refused to listen to me, so I had to look into alternative solutions. Darth Sidious offered me answers." The council members exchanged a shocked look. "Darth Sidious?" one of them repeated. Dooku let out a bitter laugh. "You don't know. He's been manipulating both sides of the war from the very beginning." Mace Windu's eyes narrowed. "And who is he?" Dooku looked at him, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. "He is the Supreme Chancellor," he said quietly. "He is Darth Sidious." The council members gasped as the revelation hit them. Palpatine, the leader of the Republic, was actually the mastermind behind the war. They couldn't believe it. But despite the shock of this revelation, the council members hesitated. They knew that they had to be certain of the truth before acting. If they accused Palpatine without proof, it could plunge the galaxy into even more chaos. So they set out to work, trying to decipher whether or not Dooku was telling the truth. They examined all evidence, looking for any clues that might confirm his claims. And as they worked, they knew that time was running out. They had to act quickly. As the Jedi High Council worked to decipher the truth about Palpatine and his involvement in the war, the Supreme Chancellor himself was not idle. He knew that the Jedi were onto him, and he needed to act fast. So he began to develop a contingency plan. He knew that the Jedi would eventually confront him. He needed to be ready. He couldn't allow them to discover the truth and bring an end to his plans. Palpatine began to gather his loyalists and plot his next move. He knew that he had to be careful, but he was confident that he could outmaneuver the Jedi. He had been one step ahead of them all along, and he had no intentions of stopping now. As the battle raged on the planet of Mandalore, Ahsoka and Anakin had reunited in order to interrogate Almec. Anakin was determined to get answers from Almec about what Maul's intentions were, and he was not afraid to use whatever means necessary to get them. At first, Almec remained silent, refusing to reveal any information, but as Anakin's impatience grew, he began to lose control. With a flick of a wrist, he used the Force to suspend Almec midair, demanding that he talked. Ahsoka watched from the sideline, frowning internally at Anakin's tactics. She knew that he was capable of great compassion and kindness, but she also knew that he was prone to anger and impatience. And in this moment, those darker emotions seemed to be in control, but despite the intimidation, Almec remained stubbornly silent. It wasn't until Anakin threatened to drop him from a great height that he finally cracked, revealing all he knew. "Maul wants to lure Skywalker here," he said, his voice shaking with fear. "He wants to get revenge on his old master, Darth Sidious." Anakin's eyes narrowed at the mention of Sidious. "What else do you know?" he demanded. "Maul is in the throne room within the city. You can find him there," he said. "That's all I know." Anakin released Almec from his grasp, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew that he had to confront Maul and uncover the truth about Sidious, and with that thought in mind, he turned and left the room. Leaving Ahsoka to follow him in his wake, they had a mission to complete, and there was no time to waste.